Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you to help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today I want to talk about saying no to food without feeling deprived and without it coming from a restrictive place. Because the anti-diet message, or the promise of the anti-diet message, is that if you stop dieting and you give yourself permission to eat all foods whenever you want, yes, you're going to eat a lot to begin with, but eventually you're going to desire those foods less and your appetite is going to level out. And this seems to work pretty well for a lot of people, but it's also a little bit simplistic for others, and it certainly was for me. I see over and over again, almost invariably, that when people stop dieting, the intensity and the severity of their binges reduce. But what often happens, sometimes happens, is that whilst the binge eating reduces, the person often feels like they're doing some more general overeating. Sometimes people will say, I feel like I'm eating the same amount, I'm just spreading it out, as opposed to having these short bursts where I'm binging. And this, I think, is where a lot of people get stuck in recovery. They see how restriction triggers their binges. They know that giving themselves food freedom reduces that. But then they struggle with the food freedom part about, well, I don't know when to say yes or no when I fancy a particular food. Because a lot of people will say, well, if you fancy the food, just have the food. But I'm hearing from people who are saying that doesn't change for me. Yes, I don't have the same emotional attachment to these foods, but I still find myself saying yes over and over again, because every time I try to say no, I'm worried about restricting. There can almost be this sense of a bit of anxiety and tension in saying no to food, because saying no to food has historically been so associated with restriction. So now saying no to food feels like restriction, even if it's not, just because the association of the past. So there's something, I think, in this work about trying to find our no from a place of self-care and trying to look after ourselves. But before I go any further, I want to invite you to check out my podcast, Life After Diets, if you haven't yet. I put stuff on Instagram, that's just the surface level stuff when I'm talking about recovery. And then I do these videos where I get to go into it in a bit more depth. But on the podcast, I get to go even deeper. So if you are getting value from these videos and they're useful, you may want to check out the podcast, Life After Diets, available across all the podcast platforms. Now back to saying no. And I want to qualify this, because this is the most important point I'll make in the video. I should make this point at the end to make everybody watch the whole video, but if this is the only thing you take away, let it be this. The choice is not yes or no. When it comes to trying to decide whether to eat something, it's not a yes or no choice. It's not a have it or don't have it choice. What it is a have it now or have it later or another time. There are very few occasions where you will be making a food decision where if you do not have that food in that moment, it's never going to be available to you again. This is why the permission part is so helpful, because you can say not now when you truly know it is available to you at another time, when perhaps you will enjoy it more and it will feel like that's what you really want to do in that moment. When you turn it into yes or no, it's that saying no to food that can be so triggering in a mind that's highly sensitive to restriction and knows how to trigger off a binge at any whisper of restriction. So it's never like not having the food. It's just about when. If you are trying to decide whether to have some ice cream or some chocolate, if you don't have it now, you are going to have it at some point. And that is freedom. And you might want it now. And that is also freedom. But when you get in that tense negotiation with yourself, the moment you are making that food decision from a tense place, you're likely to be triggering off all these old feelings, all these old thoughts, and now you're confused. And in that moment of stress about having, not having, you grab the food. And then you're confused because you're saying, well, I'm giving myself permission, but I keep grabbing the food. And it's because there's still this moment of tension going on when you're making the actual choice. So then how do you know whether to have the food now or have the food later? You are not going to learn that by watching a video. You're not going to learn that by reading a book, by listening to podcasts or anybody else talking about this stuff. You will learn how to make these choices by making these choices. But what matters is the emotional state you're in when you make them. Ideally, you want to shift your attitude into one of experimentation, of paying attention, of slowing down a bit, and of using decisions that when you have something and afterwards you feel like, oh, that wasn't the decision that I would have liked to have made. I would have liked to have waited and had that food another time. To use that as a learning opportunity and paying attention to how it feels different in your body. This is how I know, because the reasons why you choose to have something now or not are crucial, because your reasons will dictate your emotional experience, and then your emotions will dictate your behavior around food. So if you had to fast for a medical procedure and you couldn't eat all morning, that would be a very different emotional experience to when you are trying to restrict and not eat and deliberately eat less. There may still be some anxiety around fasting for medical reasons, just because you've had a disordered relationship with food. But you know the reasons, and if you can trust that you're going to probably want to eat more later, and you account for that, and you have foods that you know you're going to enjoy and feel satisfied by later on, it's not going to be the same experience of choosing not to eat all morning to try and make up for a binge you had last night. That's going to have a very different reaction to how you eat later on. So it's not about the not having the food now that's triggering the binge eating, it's the why. Now, here's another bit where people fall into a caveat, is then they get into analysis paralysis, and they're examining their reasons, and if they've had any whisper of a thought about weight loss, then they think, gosh, their reasons must be restrictive, and that means I have to have the food now. Let's get out of our thinking minds here. They're kind of what got us in trouble in the first place. When you're making the decision, check in with how you feel. Your emotions will tell you whether this is a peaceful decision or not. And if you don't feel peaceful, that's the point to look at, okay, what am I believing in this moment? What am I telling myself that's causing me to feel this tension around this decision? And when we take that experimental approach, we can reduce catastrophization. Because when you catastrophize a decision you made, that's likely to trigger more binging. It's the whole thing, I ate because I ate, right? I feel like I've messed up, so I'm just going to carry on eating, that being the trigger, as opposed to there's something to learn from this, there's something to notice, there's something to pay attention to. So let me share an example from last night. I had a friend come over for dinner, and she brought with her a packet of, I don't know if everyone's going to know what these are if you're not in the UK, but Cadbury's chocolate fingers, the mint flavour. And she brought them for us to have after the meal. So we had our dinner. She opens the biscuits. And now the old me, at this point, would have done something probably along the lines of, if I was sharing something with someone, matching them one for one. So I'd eat whatever they ate. But I'm more relaxed around food these days, so that didn't cross my mind. But what I did notice was that she was eating them quite quickly. And I had a moment where I was like, oh, I need to eat more because they're all going to be gone. And I felt that just slight tension, and I thought, oh, I caught it. I noticed what it was and what it was telling me. And I reminded myself, Sarah, there's a Tesco 100 metres down the road. If you want Cadbury's mint chocolate fingers tomorrow, you can go and get some. And just in the reminding myself of that, I was like, okay, what do I actually want now? What am I really going to enjoy? And I don't know how many I had. I had fewer than her, which would have been unheard of, a few years ago. I would have had the same as them and tried to make sure that I had as much as I felt was appropriate in those situations. That would have been how I'd made those decisions, because it would have been in the past a window of opportunity to have them, because it would have given me permission, someone else having them. So I would want to make the most of it, and I wouldn't want to be hard done by or miss out. And that is what that feeling of deprivation is it feels like you're missing out. And that's why the permission part is so important at the same time, is to protect you from that and knowing that the food is still going to be there and you are allowed it. If you are struggling with the giving yourself permission part, because you feel like you just keep always saying, I'll have it, I'll have it, I'll have it. I want to say that that is a really normal stage to go through. I think it can look like, when you look at social media or stuff out there, that other people give themselves permission, and yeah, they eat quite a bit, but then, you know, all their food issues disappear, and now they know how to make perfect decisions because they just listen to their bodies and they crave all the healthy foods. Recovery is more individualized and it's more nuanced. So let me know whether this was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.